That was a horrible situation. I was furious at Dan Love, who was the agent in charge of that operation. Shortly thereafter, I noticed a lot of problems with the BLM in the counties in southern Utah. The sheriffs were complaining constantly about how they were misusing their Utah peace officer status. Now, as a federal officer under U.S. Marshals, I have the authority throughout the country. It doesn't have to be on federal ground. And that, because of, we're from the Old West, we're true old-time guys. We're the only agency that can deputize and that individuals. And I bring this up, you'll understand why. I get a call from Cameron Knoll, who is the sheriff of Beaver County. His dad represented Noel, and I'm sure you gentlemen know him. Cameron addressed the issue and said, you know what, Mike? I just lost the battery. Don't want to use that all the time. So I received this phone call, and he said, look, my dad's really concerned about this. We've given federal officers peace officer status. And the purpose of that is that if I'm off duty, not working with the marshals, but I was walk into a grocery store and there was a robbery going down, that I could be able to respond. And I've actually done this. I actually caught a robbery suspect and a kidnapping suspect up in Salt Lake County, just being off duty. So it's a good thing to have that peace officer status. Well, BLM was abusing their Utah peace officer status. And so I actually went up and sat in Representative Noel's office, and I helped them craft the legislation that these fine gentlemen passed that stripped the BLM and the Forest Service of their law enforcement authority. I personally helped work on that legislation. BLM was furious with me. I actually had Agent Love call me and say, hey Jim, why did you do this? And the only way I can get around it now is if you'll special deputize me. And I just laughed at him. I said, you're serious? You guys? And that. After that, of course, they continued on with their misconduct. We had the Bundy situation down in Las Vegas. I was very disappointed in the way the sheriff handled that situation down there. Okay. After that incident, I personally had a run-in with BLM. I was out on West Mountain with my young son. We were on private property. There was no fire restrictions, no closures in the area. I noticed a BLM agent coming up, and he started kicking people off of the mountain. He had no authority to do that. It was not BLM ground. He got over to me, and I stood my ground against him. I didn't tell him who I was at first. He's like, you have no right to be here, you need to leave. I said, no, this is private property, and I actually have the owner's permission. It was in the clay pits up there. And he said, no, you have to leave. There's no shooting allowed out here. And I says, that's not true, and you don't have authority on this ground. And he again, look, I'm not going to tell you again, you need to leave. And I says, what, are you going to arrest me or are you going to cite me? Please do so. I would love it if you give me a ticket. And I says, because I know you don't have any jurisdiction here. And I says, as a matter of fact, let me explain something to you. I'll let you in on a little clue. I'm a United States Marshal. I do have authority on this ground. And I helped take your authority away on this ground because of your abuse, just like this. You're abusing your authority. And he says, well, I don't care. You still need to leave. He stood his ground. I stood my ground. I looked at my son and I said, you don't have to listen to this gentleman. Derek, you go back to shooting. And he just looked at me and I looked at him and turned around and smiled. Of course, he stood there for a few minutes, got in his truck and he left. Well, the following day was Sunday. On Monday, I went in and filed a complaint with the federal government against his behavior. And that I will stand up to any federal agency or any individual that would try and violate your constitutional rights. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
Hi. I'd like to give Mr. Kennedy and Mr. Herrod a few minutes, but what I have is last year's state convention resolution on balancing the budget. And I'd appreciate both of their comments on this. If anyone else wants to ask a question for a couple minutes, that's fine.
Okay, we can take other questions while they're looking at this. Pam?
I'm sorry, but I'm just a little bit unclear on how the sheriff and the police work. Do you overlap? Are there places where you combine your efforts? How does that work?
All of the above. Your sheriff is the chief law enforcement officer for the county, okay? Each of your cities have their police department, and they're responsible for responding to, the crimes in progress and enforcing the traffic violations in those areas. And that the sheriff, his responsibility for responding to the crimes in progress and the traffic violations is mainly in the unincorporated areas and in the 7 contract cities that we have throughout the county, and then the other small townships. Okay. However, the sheriff needs to be a leader, and he needs to be able to work with all of the police chiefs within this county, and needs to be able to look at the crimes that cross city boundaries. That's why I have the expertise in working in those areas. Gangs, they're not just a Provo problem, okay? That's a countywide problem. Sexual predators are a countywide problem. Drug trafficking is a countywide problem. Those areas that are a countywide problem, I will be actively involved in and working with our local police chiefs and officers to make sure that we're doing everything we can to protect what you value most.
Okay. I appreciate Steve bringing that. Steve's actually running for Congress as well, and he's a great guy. So he's running against me, but he really is, and I appreciate the work with grassroots that he's done over the years. As far as the resolution with balanced budget, to me that is a top priority, because I do believe that our national debt has become a national security issue. It truly has. I've lived through hyperinflation, and when you have hyperinflation, everybody that did everything right, they see everything evaporate. They see it evaporate overnight. I lived through 1,000% inflation. And so there's a couple ways that you do it. For me, one of the first ways is one of the things that I plan on doing is immediately if I get elected, I will tell leadership, I will not vote for a spending increase or a debt ceiling increase if it doesn't have with it a 10-year plan to get us back to a balanced budget amendment. So don't come to me at the last minute on a Friday night at 11:59 and blame me for shutting down the government. You have known beforehand that I'm going to vote no. The other thing that needs to be done that I think we could solve the problem is Congress likes crises, because then they are able to push everything through. We should do what we do in the Utah Legislature. The very first week, we pass a base budget. It's 10% less of last year's. That way, if everything blows up, the government still keeps working. Our senior citizens still get checks, maybe a little bit less, but it's not the crisis that forces everybody to vote for a bill that they've never read.
Thanks, Chris. I thought that was outstanding, and I agree. Our national debt, I believe, is our greatest national security threat. We have to get a handle on this. And as a kid who grew up in poverty, I recognize that if you don't run money, money's going to run you, and it usually is running you over. I understood that as a youth, and I understand that as an adult. I'll just say personally, these kind of approaches are fundamental. Guess what? Utah's got it right. As former Representative Herrod clearly indicated, we balance our budget every year in this state. The federal government could have learned an awful lot from us about how to do these things that we do here, and instead of learning, they just continue to march forward with omnibus bills like we just passed a few weeks ago, which increases our national debt. In less than 2 days to read that bill. That's over 2,000 pages long. And I'll just tell you, as you're a U.S. Senator, it's a no vote. It's a no vote. If I don't have time to read that, if I don't have time to even look at it, then it's not going to be a yes vote for sure. And if the government has to shut down, it has to shut down. And that is a government-created crisis. Just as former Representative Herrod suggests, is that it's a tactic to get people to vote for things that they wouldn't necessarily vote for. So how do I do those things that we're doing? It's something that my wife and I have already done. We paid off our home mortgage in half the time that we were supposed to pay it off. This Kennedy family is not going off to Hawaii. I don't own a condo in Key West. What we do own is our own house. God has been gracious to us, and we're grateful that we've had the money to pay off our mortgage in half the time, including our medical student loans. We had 30 years to do that. We paid it off in 15. It was one of those. We are committed personally to these kind of efforts, and as your servant in the Senate, it would be the same thing. Thank you.
Shirley,
I would like each of the candidates.
Shirley, stand up.
I would like each of the candidates to speak their position on legalizing marijuana for medicinal purposes. Please state your
We'll
question.
start with
Okay, I think the direction the state's been going, which is very slow, very deliberate, is important. I think the danger is that any kind of medical marijuana legalization becomes, the gateway to recreational legalization and just widespread abuse. I ultimately see